Good afternoon, Albemarle County. I'm Emily Kilroy, the Director of Communications and Public Engagement for the county government, and I am really pleased to welcome you to today's conversation. So today we're going to be talking with Chief Dan Eggleston of Albemarle County Fire Rescue. We've got a couple of questions that I have for Chief Eggleston, and then we'll turn it over to you. So if you're watching by Zoom, you can use the Q&A pod, and if you're on Facebook, you can leave a comment. And as time allows, we will take questions from the audience. Before we dive in, I do want to share that we are at a station. We are at a station that has a crew operating out of it. We're at Hollymead Station 12. And if a call comes into dispatch from here, we've got to our right the engine and the ambulance. Those are the most common vehicles that respond to calls out of the station. And so that shouldn't interfere at all with our interview. But right behind us today is the tanker truck. The tanker is used for calls that come in where they're outside of the urban service area, there's no fire hydrants, and this truck allows our crews to access water to put out a fire. So if one of those calls comes in, this tanker is going to roll out from behind us. We're going to keep going, but just wanted to warn everyone in case that happens. So fingers crossed we don't see that, but it'll be exciting if we do. It really is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Chief Dan Eggleston to have this conversation today. He's been the chief of Albemarle County Fire Rescue basically since its inception.
Yeah, 20 years.
20 years. We're going to talk a lot about sort of where the system's been and where the system is going, and how our community has changed over Dan's tenure. So with that, Chief, I already mentioned we're at Hollymead Station 12. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of this station?
Sure. Yeah, before I get started, let me just take a moment, and I would like to thank all the people in fire rescue, both volunteer and career, who work every day to ensure that we provide the absolute best service to our residents. I mean, it is the most committed group of people I have ever worked with in my life, and I'm just so grateful to be their chief and work alongside them. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge their great work. But yeah, we're sitting here at the Hollymead Station, which was built back in 2008. Because this area is one of our development areas. It's a very vibrant area, has of course our airport, our Defense Intelligence Agency, and many of the other commercial and retail establishments, as well as residential. And we had no fire station in this area, so we had long response times to respond in from the rural area to the urban area. So there was a desire to establish a footprint here, a station here. We were very fortunate at the time that we had a wonderful partnership with the UVA Foundation, who gave us the land for this station, and we were able to build a road that eventually connected in with the research park. So it was a win-win situation. We have very good service in this area now. It was done in a partnership with UVA, which in turn helped to relieve the taxpayer burden on some of the costs associated with building this station.
The proximity that we have here to the airport, to a lot of the dense commercial activity that we have on 29 North, probably drives some of the call volume and some of the risks that this station responds to in particular. Can you talk a little bit about the risk profile for this first due area?
Yes, well, a lot of the development here is rather new, so the risk profile is a little low, but in terms of some of the activity, like with the airport and then of course the 29, tends to rise or increase the risks associated with things like traffic accidents, transportation accidents, hazardous materials. We do have some elderly care facilities in this area, which will tend to drive a lot of our calls because of the medical side of our business. So those kind of things we look at very closely in terms of our risk profile to make sure that we have adequate resources in place, anticipating those call volumes may shift over time. But yeah, our community is aging as well. Some of the social factors like that tend to increase our response time, or excuse me, our call volume as well. So we look at all of that to anticipate when we need to put additional services in place.
Excellent. One of my favorite facts about this station is that it is actually the home of some of the industrial sewing equipment that ACFR has. That was purchased with some grant funding a couple years ago. And this is a really amazing story about how, I think a lot of people look at themselves and say, well, gosh, I could never volunteer to get on a fire truck, but I really want to support my community. How can I get involved? Tell us a little bit about the sewing program, what that's for, and who helps volunteer to support that.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So we had the Innovation Fund within the county, which was designed to help fund some great ideas that many of our county employees have. So we had some employees here assigned to the Hollymead station noticed that we were spending an enormous amount of money to repair our turnout gear. You know, this is a set of gear that cost about $4,000. It's very expensive. And we had to send that equipment out to get repaired to the manufacturer, and it would take forever to get back. It was very expensive. Keep in mind, we're supporting a system of about 350 volunteers and 160 career staff, so we have a lot of money invested in our turnout gear. So they made a proposal to bring all that in-house, and they would do their own repairs once they had training from the manufacturer. Well, during that process, Captain Huff, who worked here, who had a wonderful network of friends and family in the neighborhood, had people contact her. We call them the sewing ladies, and they said, you know, we could do as good a job, if not better, if you allow us to come down, take the training, and participate, which that really started this great community event where they would come down, they would repair everything we had. They actually made us bags and all kinds of other accessories, and the firefighters just loved them, and they loved to hang out with the firefighters, and it was such a wonderful example, like you said, about if you want to help out your community, we have a place for you. And no one would have thought that that would happen. But it was a great asset for us. They continue to work here all the time, and we just love them. So we're very fortunate to have that.
It's such an amazing story. They have, I came down here one time while they were working, and they have just an amazing energy. They have a great rapport with the crew, and also, you know, it's really a great time for them to sort of catch up on life. It's a nice social opportunity for the women who work on that.
They see themselves as an integral part of being able to serve the community. You know, without their support, it would make it much tougher. So they see themselves connected to our mission, which is wonderful. I mean, that's exactly what we want. We need the community to step up and help us out.
It's such an amazing opportunity. You know, speaking of stepping up, you know, you've had you've had a long career in the fire service, and also outside of the fire service. So your first career was not as a firefighter. How did you get here, you know, to Albemarle County Chief of Fire Rescue?
Good, and it's okay to say I've had a very long career. Yeah, so I had an interesting career. So my father, when I was growing up, was a charter member of our volunteer fire department. He actually helped build the station, and I worked alongside him and many of the community members. So I was indoctrinated in the fire service early on, and it was such a wonderful time to work alongside my dad and really immerse myself in what it's like to be a firefighter. We also had a deputy chief at the time who was an elite firefighter with the city of Richmond. They worked at the flying squad in Richmond. He was the best firefighter I've ever known in my life. He sort of took us under his wing and taught us not only what it takes to be a good firefighter, but what tradition in the fire service means to us and how important history is and what it's like to have the honor to serve your community. So I had that wonderful experience. It was in Chesterfield County, who was so forward-thinking in terms of their training for their firefighters and in their community. So I was extremely blessed to be immersed in that environment. But I wanted to be an engineer like my father. So I went to school and I became an engineer. I was lucky enough to land this wonderful job that allowed me to work in various roles in field engineering, product development, including international operations. So I had a chance at a very young age to travel around the world and work with many people to, you know, bring some good products and innovation to them. But the whole time I was being pulled to the fire service. I remember like it was yesterday, I was in Tokyo with a colleague, and he says, what do you want to do tonight? And I said, I want to go to a fire station. So we went to a fire station, and, you know, I had to drag him along. So there came a point in my time I thought, you know, while I'm young, I need to make this break. And people told me I was nuts and that I'll be back, and I never went back. I still stay in touch with those folks, but I jumped right into the fire service full head on. You know, I went back to school, got a graduate degree. I jumped into the Executive Fire Officer program at the National Fire Academy. I was honored enough to have a fellowship at the Kennedy School at Harvard. So working here in Albemarle has allowed me to continue to focus on the professionalism of the job and really sort of spread my wings and exercise, not only be a good fire chief, but this county has allowed me to be a good participant in terms of our leadership team at the county, and I'm extremely grateful for all that. So I've had a great 2 careers, to be honest with you.
We're really glad to have you, and we're lucky to have you. what does the Chief of Fire Rescue actually do? What's your day-to-day job like, and when you pull out of the weeds of, the issue of the day, broad brush, what does a Chief of Fire Rescue really do?
Well, my boss asked me the same question. He says, no, I'm just joking. It is different. I always tell people I still sleep with one eye open. I always have to be on. Like this morning, I started my morning just before 5 o'clock, checking in over last night's events and what happened yesterday. We had 2 terrible fatalities out on the roadways, making sure that folks are okay, checking in on anything that's happened as a result of that. I tend to do an environmental scan about what's happening in our community. And then in a broad stroke, I provide direction and resources for our wonderful group of folks that are working in fire rescue. It doesn't sound exciting, but it's very meaningful. We have a system that runs about 17,000 calls a year. We have over 500 people participating in this department out of 14 stations, so it's a busy operation. So keeping that going, keeping a focus on our mission, understanding the changes in the community, what are we going to look like 5 years from now? How are we going to step up and help our residents out even more? What are some of the trends that are coming down the road is all a part of what I do. I work alongside, a wonderful group of leaders within the department, our deputy chiefs who I meet with every Monday. We have a strategy meeting every Monday to talk about things. So in essence, that's basically what I do. It's a lot of shifting. Sometimes when there's a big event, you have to put all that aside and you have to go out and help everybody serve our residents.
Excellent. It's so interesting. Even though you're the chief, you do go out to calls. So if unfortunately someone finds themselves in the circumstances where they're calling on ACFR for help, they may see you there, and you may not be pulling hose, but you're certainly part of making sure that everything on the ground is going okay and that resources are being deployed the right way. And I know it's meaningful to see that, that you're out there with everybody.
Well, that's something, as I was growing up in the fire service, it meant a lot to me to see my officers out there getting dirty, as we say, with them, and the chiefs to see. And our medical director, as an example, Dr. Brady with UVA, still requires me to go through the same training and get recertified every year. So I'm in there alongside some of these wonderful paramedics and firefighters, training and doing the medical equipment. I'm not the fastest around, but I've got a little bit of history there. But I like to keep my skills up. To me, that's the best part of the job, is being out there working alongside our wonderful group of folks. I just ran a call last week. I think we had an entrapment accident on Ivy Road, and I got there right after the engine and the crew worked together. This is a great call where the city of Charlottesville and us responded together. And it just filled my heart to see them functioning so efficiently and getting the job done and getting the people out of the car, transported to the hospital very rapidly. And just being part of that, really excites me. It keeps me going after many years in this business.
I think that's one of the things, I'm going off script here, that's one of the things that's always been so inspiring to me. I do occasionally get to go out to scenes of motor vehicle entrapments and fires, and you see, what you might notice is the trucks, the engines are all from different stations. They all have different numbers on them. And so once all those resources mobilize to support a scene, everybody kind of is working together. It doesn't matter what station they're from. Can you talk a little bit about how that works? How do folks who don't work together day in and day out successfully work together out in the field to make sure that they're serving the community?
Yeah, good point. Well, we put a lot of time and effort in our training to make sure that we have the right structures and policies, so that a lot of that's scripted. So everybody knows their role. There's one person in charge that gives the orders and direction. And then each person is broken down into groups. Each group and each person knows their role. It makes it much smoother. So it's very much like a sporting event, is where everybody has their role. When the balls snap, you may be from a different team, but you know what you need to do in terms of bringing that situation under control. So it works great, and I'm very proud. We've had some very chaotic situations, as you can imagine, in fire rescue. But they are be able to tackle those things and just bring it to closure very quickly and very professionally. I'm very proud of what they've been able to do.
Yeah. All right, we're going to do a quick lightning round of questions about you, and then we will stop talking about you, I promise.
Okay.
So what are you reading right now?
I'm reading this book called Terra on Two Wheels. It's about this adventure motorcyclist that's traveling through South America and eventually gets kidnapped by a group of bandits. And I'm reading that because I'm planning a 2-week off-road motorcycle trip starting next week from Tennessee to New York.
Wow.
So hopefully I will not get kidnapped.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. But it, I was born with that adventure gene, and so I love to explore. I love to travel. I love to experience new cultures, challenges. And so that keeps me going, reading things like that.
Yeah. What are you watching?
Well, I've just watched and finished the biography of Benjamin Franklin, so that was very interesting because he's the father of the fire service.
I did not know that.
Yes, and the very first organized volunteer departments outside of Philadelphia, Union Fire Company. So anything related to Benjamin Franklin, I'm drawn to. But I also just finished watching Severance on Apple TV, which is a fascinating sort of a science fiction thing. It's pretty cool. So I like to balance things out.
Yeah, you've got a lot of diverse interests. All right, so that leaves us to music. What's your favorite artist or band?
Well, I was laughing with Abby earlier. It's Stevie Ray Vaughan has to be my favorite, but not a lot of people know who that is. He is from Austin. Before Austin was like a super cool place to go, but his style and his music, it just resonates with me. It's really nice.
Could you sing us some?
No. But
I won't make you do that.
I find myself just as comfortable listening to a podcast. When I'm working at my shop and building something, I like to listen to like New York Times or Freakonomics Radio, one of those podcasts, or Sean Tubbs.
Or Let's Talk Albemarle.
Let's Talk Albemarle's at the top of my playlist. So yeah, I like to sort of balance things out and just listen to different things.
Yeah. And then you said in your shop, what do you like to do outside of work? Tell us about your shop.
Well, I love anything outdoors, and I am a father of a mechanical engineer, so I like to make things. He taught me how to weld and do woodworking and fix things, so I have this shop outside of my house that I do a lot of that work in. I'm restoring an old pickup truck too, so I love to do that. I like to also go hiking in this beautiful country that we have. We're so fortunate to have the Appalachian Trail within walking distance here. So I've got, a secret way to get to that trail and do some rice loops, and it's just great. So that's one of the things that drew me to Albemarle County is just the many outdoor activities. Our parks that we have here rival state parks in other states. So it's just amazing. I run into people who come from miles to come to our parks, and then, I can just have a short drive or a ride for my bike. So that's what I like to do. I like to be outside. When I was young, when we got up, my mom kicked us out of the house and we didn't come back in until it was dark.
That's great. And we talked about this a little bit. What's your favorite place in Albemarle County?
Well, I would say it's at Sugar Hollow, I think, is one of my favorites, just because that's a great access to a lot of the trails. And many other people share that same place too, because it is packed on the weekends.
It is.
And But that's great to see people out enjoying our beautiful parks and trails and so forth. But I live in Crozet, so I tend to stay out in the western end of the county next to the mountains. I just love the mountains and spend a lot of time there. It's very therapeutic for me to be in the woods.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Dan. Mm-hmm. Okay, so back to sort of our community. We talked a little bit about some of the unique risk profiles for the Hollymead area, but generally speaking about the community, what are some of the more common calls that ACFR responds to? And then how has the risk profile shifted over the time that you've been with the county? Yeah,
good question. Well, some of the driving factors, what we look at, and it impacts our calls, of course, is urbanization. The county is an urbanizing county. People love to move here, just like we did. That drives our calls. Also, the aging of our population tends to drive our calls up too, especially on the medical side. Older people tend to use public safety services a little more, so that drives it. But also any kind of social shifts too. We saw that during the pandemic too, where social impacts in the community. We're one of the first people to determine that, to feel that. If there's a problem in a community, oftentimes we see an uptick in calls. One of the things that really I'm focused on quite a bit is the underserved population, particularly those elderly people that may live by themselves, socially isolated, who don't have access to health care. And oftentimes they'll call 911 because they are running out of options. We don't mind going, but there's a better way of gaining access to health care. You know, I can say with confidence our healthcare system is broken, and we feel it. And I've darkened the halls of Congress. I've spent a lot of time in D.C. trying to get some changes so that we can better serve our residents. It's very frustrating to me that our only option in 911 is to take someone to the hospital, which is the most expensive treatment. All we're asking for is being able to divert and take them to a primary care physician if possible, or perhaps even treat and release. So those are the kind of things we're trying to push at the federal and the state level. And we've made some progress, but you know, I don't like bureaucracy, and I like to get things done, and that just frustrates me. But we're not giving up. And I'm working with our association and many of our elected officials to get that done. But that's the kind of things we're seeing. You know, I'm really excited about what we have loaded in next year's budget. Is our mental health response team. It's a partnership with the Department of Social Services and the police department to respond to mental health crisis in a way that's much more caring, much more suited for the situation versus treating it a little bit different than the past. We've already had a series of meetings to put some framework around that, and I'm very encouraged.
Can you share a little bit about, you know, a little more specifically, once that team is in place, again, it's social services, social worker, a police officer, and someone with fire rescue, a call comes in, it appears as though it's a mental health crisis underway. What happens? What will that team do when they're in place that's different than what happens today?
Well, we first have to assess the situation, make sure it's a safe environment, because we don't want to send someone in an environment that may be dangerous to their life. But once that's the case, then we'll do some further assessment on scene to determine what's the best route for this person. Is it to have a social worker talk to them? Is it perhaps a deferral to another place to get treatment? Or is it just a crisis that can be averted through bringing in family members or other resources to help that person recover? You know, so it's some diagnostics associated with that to determine what's the best treatment for that person. Whereas in the past, oftentimes those calls would just get sent to the police department, and they didn't have a lot of options at the time. So we decided to broaden the team with a group of clinicians. Sometimes it could be health-related issues where we would come in. So now we've got a group that can look at it from a broad perspective, sort of diagnose what the problem is, and then get that person the best help they can.
Would you say that the team, once in place, will go, you know, they'll kind of more broadly work with the individual than just the immediate crisis?
Yes, there'll be some mitigation and prevention efforts that we look for as well. You know, we have known folks in the community that right now we know are struggling. So we're going to reach out ahead of time with those people. We're doing it now too. Our firefighter Castings does a wonderful job of that now. Now we'll be able to bring more resources to the table. You know, he has been working, and many of the others along with social services, with many of our partner agencies in the Charlottesville-Albemarle area that are designed for this kind of work. So it's a matter in some cases of bringing them to the table so that they can offer their services too. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the mitigation and prevention services as well.
So, you know, back to more traditional calls. You know, today a 911 call comes in. What happens between the phone call and you know, a fire engine pulling out of the station or pulling into the driveway of you know, the address where the call came from?
Yeah, well, you know, we've made great strides in that area. You know, thankfully with the funding from the board and the community, we've been able to invest heavily in technology to make that go much smoother. So someone pick up the phone, they dial, and let's say there's an accident on 29 here, and they think somebody might be trapped in the car. Well, the dispatcher, the call taker, will run through a list of scripted questions to really understand what's going on. They do that very quickly. And then that starts to put together what kind of situation that is, what kind of emergency, because it's their job to then match the resources that are needed to mitigate that emergency. And this is all happening very quickly. So once they understand the type of emergency, they put it in our computer-aided dispatch system. And then that figures out exactly who's the closest resource to that scene. And we've moved away from dispatching stations to now each fire truck has its own computer. and GPS systems, so it knows where all those resources are at any one time. So in this case, that would require 2 fire engines, an ambulance, a battalion chief, and a squad company that's specialized in extricating people. So it knows, it goes out and instantly picks all those places, all those apparatus, and they dispatch them. And then all the CAD information, all the call taker information is populated on the computer screens in the fire truck so that the battalion chiefs and the company officers know exactly what they're going to. Just all this information at their fingertips. So that's helped us out quite a bit because we're very busy. Sometimes units are tied up on other calls, and we need systems to go out and help figure out what are the best resources to send, who's the closest by their location. Sometimes we have impediments such as bridges and underpasses we can't go over, and it figures all that out. It tells us the fastest way to get there. It's so much better. When I first got in, we had paper maps. And we didn't know a lot of this. We had to wait till we get there to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to try to provide the firefighters as much information up front as we can so they can better mitigate that emergency when they get there.
That's a really great point. I think a lot of people think when you call 911 and an apparatus shows up at your house that it came from the station. Or the closest station to where you are. But that's not always the case because calls come in at the same time. And so resources may be coming from another call or a farther station in order to, again, like you said, make sure that you're getting the right resources there as quickly as possible.
Right. Yeah, it's helped us to reduce response times quite a bit and really utilize our resources much better than the previous legacy systems that we were using.
So that's a little bit about more of a fire-oriented response. Let's talk a little bit about rescue. So on a medical call where an ambulance is dispatched, some people might think of that as sort of just a ride to the hospital, but what happens, what are the individuals who respond on an ambulance doing when they get to a scene and also on the way to the hospital?
Yeah, good point. That's a phrase that often tweaks me a little bit when somebody says, are you going to give them a ride to the hospital? Well, we do more than give a ride to the hospital. It's actually pre-hospital care. And there's been so much advancements in EMS, especially the last 10 years, where this advanced care is now out of the facilities, more in the field. A paramedic who's graduating and practicing today is so much better than the paramedic 20 years ago from in terms of the knowledge and the skill set that they have to be able to treat people, a wide range of ailments and situations and choices that they have. That combined with the technology that we're seeing in terms of the tools at our fingertips now allows us to really take that service out to the field. So we will start treatment in the field, and whether or not it's drugs, IV access, diagnosis, beginning treatment as we transport that person to definitive care at the hospital. So that's great strides, and it really goes to helping us save more lives that way, just because of the advancements that now have provided to us that we didn't have years ago.
Sometimes what someone will think of as a medical call, they're expecting an ambulance, but an ambulance is not what actually responds. Can you talk a little bit about why it is that sometimes a fire truck will respond to a call that appears medical in nature?
Yeah, well, first thing, all of our firefighters are cross-trained in EMS. It's a expectation now in the fire service that we both are skilled at firefighting in EMS and many other skills as well. We're sort of the Swiss Army knife of public safety, and that knife is getting much bigger as we go. So oftentimes a fire truck will be dispatched because they may be closer to the call than the ambulance. Let's say this ambulance is on the way to the hospital, they're transporting someone, and another medical call comes in. The fire truck may go on that medical call to stabilize an individual until the ambulance can show up. In some cases too, it could be a rather acute type call. Let's say it's a cardiac arrest. That's a teamwork event that requires a lot of highly skilled people working together. And so an engine with 3 people and an ambulance with 2 people is 5 is just enough to really manage a call like that, because there's a lot going on in a certain call, like a cardiac arrest. So that's why we sometimes dispatch both of them together.
That makes a ton of sense. So one of the things that's different about Albemarle County Fire Rescue from some other fire rescue departments across the country is the combination system. And we know that volunteerism has fallen, and that's a national trend. How does that impact fire and rescue services here? And what's Albemarle County's fire rescue system doing to sort of respond to that trend?
Yeah, well, volunteerism is a backbone of America culture, right? I mean, Benjamin Franklin started the first volunteer department. He was a volunteer, and his whole recruitment was to come down and serve your community. And so that's still alive and well in Albemarle. But we're seeing that volunteers are not as readily available during the daytime as they are in the evening. So that's why we have certain stations, like Crozet, for example, that we provide staff during the day when volunteers are less available. Then at night, they switch over and they staff it at nighttime. And that's a very efficient and effective model, because we have a lot of volunteers that step up and go through this enormous amount of training to serve this community. So our job is to keep that going. Our whole mantra when it comes to supporting the volunteers is to make it cost neutral for someone to step up and serve their community. So that means we provide all the training, we pay for all the bills, we provide all the fire trucks and the ambulances, and all the volunteers have to do is go to the training and run calls. And where you go not far from here in other communities, they have to do fundraisers just to keep the lights on. So we didn't want to do that. And I think that's enabled us to have an even stronger volunteer presence here. And my hope is, because I came from a volunteer department, we will have that long in the future, and we do what we can to maintain that and keep that going.
It's such an admirable way to give time back to the community. Volunteer firefighters are often doing 12-hour shifts at stations. They often have a full-time job on top of that, and so it's amazing and inspiring to see so many individuals in the community continue to step up.
It is, yeah.
And provide those services that we really all of us rely on.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how fire rescue is positioning itself for the future?
Yes, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of trends and a lot of shifts now. We're finding ourselves much more involved today in social type work than we ever have, which is not unusual. So we are very much involved in our association, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and the medical side, to really pay attention to those trends, and not only in our communities, but in the service itself, to stay current. And we're very much involved with the National Fire Protection Association, particularly related to code enforcement and what new codes and building type technologies are being used. For example, the use of lithium-ion batteries now for sustainable energy in homes, and as well as electric cars, are something that we're training our folks on how to respond. But staying current, it can be challenging sometimes, and then trying to position ourselves so that we don't ever find ourselves behind the 8 ball when it comes to servicing those type things. I mentioned before, we're very fortunate to be here, and right in Greene County is Institute for Highway Safety, which crash tests cars. So we are able to go there and witness some of that. We can look at the vehicles after the fact so that we can utilize that information if we have to go and extricate someone from one of those vehicles. So it's a constant evaluation. We have an entire division that's focused on training and professional development. And so firefighters are always in school. That's what I tell new recruits when they graduate. They say, I just finished recruit school, I'm so happy. I said, that's only the beginning. You will, if you're serious about this job, you will be in school the rest of your life. And that's what we have to do to stay current and make sure that we're doing the very best to serve our residents.
Now, in fairness, a lot of that school is not in a classroom. Some of it is, but can you talk a little bit about some of the hands-on opportunities that your personnel, volunteer and career, have at their disposal to stay current?
Yeah, well, especially firefighting, well, the EMS too, it's a very manual type process. And, I'm an old school kind of guy. I like drilling, pulling hose and connecting. And I had an old captain who used to do it until your hands cramped. So there's no substitute for consistency, building muscle memory. It's so important in this job because we have to rely on that muscle memory oftentimes in a very difficult situation to get those things in place. So a lot of hands-on. We have simulations. We have our training center down near the regional jail. We're always down there burning something. We have mannequins for our EMS. We have training monitor defibrillators. So we're always practicing. We're always focusing on getting better. We have an entire QA process that looks at our calls and with a thought about how can we do this better next time? Are we seeing any trends that we need to focus our training and education on? So it's such a big part of what we do. And, learning is one of our core values, and we take that very seriously in fire rescue.
Yeah, and it's I've gotten to go to some of the live burns down at the training facility, and it's amazing to see, in a situation that the stakes are lower than a real life fire, right? Because it's a simulated exercise, but the fire is real. And that's such great experience, hands-on experience, and we're so lucky to have a facility that's just so available for folks.
It's our job to give that new recruit, whether it's a volunteer career, that experience at that training center. So when they show up on their first house fire, they're not surprised. Because I can tell you, when I first went in, I had no idea that the fire was going to be that hot and that dark. I couldn't see anything, and it was so hot. But that's what we want to do. We want to simulate those type of environments so that they're better prepared to do their job once they're on scene. Same thing on the medical side, so that you have some idea of what you're going to be faced with, so you can then draw upon those skills to do the job.
Absolutely. One of the things that fire rescue has worked really hard on in the past year is outside of training and skill building, which there's a long history of that in the fire service, is really looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, how it relates to your workforce. Can you talk a little bit about what ACFR has done over the past couple of years, and maybe where you're hoping to head in the future?
Yeah, we looked hard at ourselves several years ago and realized that we did not look like the community that we serve. And we can't be the very best department that we want to be unless we can relate better to our community. So we doubled down. We just said, okay, we got to do a better job. So we started digging into our numbers, looking at why aren't we attracting a more diverse group of applicants? And we found that a lot of women and people of color weren't applying for ACFR. So we dug into it deeper, and we had a pattern in the past where we would hire individuals with training already. So oftentimes they would get that training through a volunteer department, which is great. But we realized not everybody has the discretionary time to get that training. So we made a hard choice and said, we're going to commit to a 26-week school, and we're going to hire people with no experience, because we think there are people out there who want to have a great career like this but need help with the training. So we did that right out of the chute. We attracted a wide range of folks, different backgrounds, and it was wonderful. It was the first recruit school, was just fascinating. So we're not there yet. It's going to be a long-term battle, but I'm very encouraged we're out of the chute, what we've been able to accomplish. But we also did a lot of work with our incumbents, our existing folks, to make sure that we truly understand what diversity and inclusion means, and what does it mean to us as a department, especially what does it mean to us as we go out and relate with our residents.
Mental health is so important, and I think there's been a lot more recognition and awareness that our first responders have struggled with mental health. I think community members hear sirens and they think help is on the way, and too often I think we forget that the first responders who are showing up to scenes, fires, motor vehicle crashes with entrapment. We had 2 fatalities in Albemarle County just yesterday, 2 different motor vehicle crashes. It can be a real strain on the people who are helping in that situation, to be sort of the first on scene to sort of see what's going on, and it can be a real challenge for the force. It can be a real challenge for employee wellness and overall morale. How is ACFR grappling with that?
Yeah, good. It's a good question. Well, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And this job can take a toll on you. When I first got into the fire service, we didn't talk about it. In fact, I was taught to disassociate, to pack that stuff away. Don't ever talk about it. Don't ever visit it. And we know now that that's a wrong thing to do. That will come back at you. And my personal experience was, as a young person, I always wanted to be the first one in the door at a fire. I always wanted to be the first one at the patient's side. And as I shared with you earlier, I got to an age where I started noticing the pictures on dressers of family members, and it really started tugging at my heart. And I started to realize now the enormous amount of responsibility that we have to do our job. We can't save everyone, and that's a huge burden that many of our providers have. We lost a very valued member of this department not long ago. He took his own life. and we're determined to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And we've invested even more in our peer support network that are trained peer support providers by psychologists. We have on-duty access to mental health experts for our people, all done confidentially to make sure that they can do a good job for our residents, but also make sure that they're healthy and they're prepared. And that's so important for us because you know, it's tough enough. I mentioned being a Swiss Army knife firefighter. That job in itself is difficult. To switch from one to the next, and you got to do it perfectly each time, is a huge stress on people. And now we're starting to learn that you know, we've got to provide ways for people to cope with that so that they don't resort to unhealthy habits. And so it's so important to us. I think it's going to be even more of a focus on that in the future as we learn more about what we can do. But I'm very proud of many of our folks stepped up to be peer support people. We've had a lot of conversations about that. We've had a lot of support from other departments around the state when we had this tragedy. So yeah, it's something that's at the forefront of our minds every day.
Thank you for sharing that. I know, as you said, it's not something that we talk about a lot, but I think it's so important, and it's something that I'm really proud that, you know, your department or organization is really committed to trying to move the needle on. Well, I have gotten to ask you a lot of questions. You don't get to ask me any, but
Darn.
But we're going to open it up to some of the audience questions now. First, I just want to thank everyone who's on the call. I hear that our friend Jack Maxwell with the Scottsville Task Force is watching, so thank you everyone. Thank you, Jack, for all the work that you do. I got to spend some quality time with Jack over the weekend at the Foxfield races.
He's a great guy.
Absolutely. So one of the questions that has come in is, how is Albemarle County Fire Rescue working to improve response times?
Yeah, well, we look at it from several different points of view. First of all, the technology we've invested we call it call processing time. So that once that call is placed at the center, how fast can we process it and dispatch it? You know, we've invested station alerting systems that will give the firefighters here sort of a pre-alert. They say, hey, something's coming in for your district. We're going to give you a little pre-alert to let you know, get ready. We don't know exactly what it is and what needs to go yet. That gives them a little bit of jump. You know, there's technology like preemptive traffic devices we have on all of our apparatus so we can turn a light green, and so that we can go through an intersection without having to, you know, wait for the light. Those kind of things will really improve response times. It's more than just stations. It's those technologies that help to improve response times. You know, we're looking at capacity too. Our medic unit down 29 South here, down on Berkmar, is one of our busiest medic units. It's about 30% concurrent calls. So we think eventually we're going to have to invest more resources down there, because when they're not available, it tends to increase response times because other units from outside the area have to respond in. So we look at all that. We try to shift things around when possible to cover those response times. But you know, we have a county of 723 square miles. It's a lot to cover, certainly. So, but I think we've done a really good job of looking at all that and making changes necessary to improve those times.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, a lot of your job is responding to calls. Some of your job is prevention, though. When there's a fire in a neighborhood, tell us a little bit about what crews do in the days following. Yeah,
well, we consider that sort of a tragedy anytime somebody has a fire in a building or a neighborhood, but it's also the time of heightened awareness in the community when there's a fire. So we take advantage of that opportunity. We go out right away with door hangers. We engage with people. We remind them that smoke alarms are their best and most cost-effective option to ensure that their family can get out if they were to have a fire. So we do that. We canvass the neighborhoods. We've had some great response from that. People, you know, don't think about it. They don't think about smoke alarms. They just think it's there. But oftentimes we find that smoke alarms haven't been tested or don't even work. So we replace them free of charge. That's been a really great endeavor to help us with the prevention side. We also have a team of people back at ACFR offices that look at all the new developments and make sure that they're designed to proper fire codes. So we build neighborhoods that are safest as possible. 2 ways to get in and out. You know, the buildings are constructed to meet the fire code, so we build it from an engineering point of view that it's safe to begin with. But then we ask all the time for the community's help to pay attention to those kind of things that could perhaps threaten you or your family. And that even spreads out into preparedness for emergency management type endeavors like weather events. You know, we saw the terrible tornadoes in the Midwest here. We're not immune to tornadoes, and we need to keep people ever vigilant.
Absolutely. Remind everybody, I learned this after starting work with the county. It's not just changing the batteries on the smoke detectors that you have to do. They actually have the units themselves actually have a shelf life.
Yes.
Remind us how often we're supposed to replace those.
Well, many of them have a 10-year battery. We like to recommend they go about 5 years. So, but oftentimes they get painted over too. So it's good timing, isn't it?
After yesterday's 2 fatalities, is there anything the Albemarle County Fire Rescue wants the public to know about how to stay safe on roads and how to stay out of the way when there's a response?
Yes. Well, you know, we frustrate some people sometimes because we respond to apparatus to the roadways. One is intended to block the traffic so that we can keep our providers safe. There was a wonderful Hanover firefighter lost his life a few years ago because he was hit on the interstate. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen here. So be patient is the first thing. But also we join the police department in terms of making sure that people don't drive distracted, try to prevent the accident from happening in the first place. Everybody's so busy, and I understand everybody's life is, you know, very hectic sometimes, but just slow down, enjoy life.
We're gonna take a pause. The engine 121 has just been called into service, and they're gonna be heading out in just a second here.
I don't know if I need to repeat myself. It was a little noisy.
Well, how was the audio? We're just doing a technical check. Okay, we'll go to the next question. So, how soon will the community actually see that community response team, the mental health crisis team, sort of in action? I know there's been planning to this point. It's a budget item for fiscal year 23, but how soon will folks sort of see that in operation?
Well, I would say that it's already in place to some degree. We actually had one of our first official call-outs here a couple weeks ago, but formally, we hope to bring it up to speed soon after the fiscal year starts in July. It may not be fully functional at that point because social services and the police department have to reassign some folks to that. But we're answering those calls today, and we're providing resources. It'll just look a little bit different after July once those resources are in place.
And how is that going to improve the work that Albemarle County Fire Rescue does?
Well, you know, again, I consider it's part of our role to help residents be in a good spot so they don't rely on calling 911 for service. So if someone's having a crisis, we have a role in to try to bring that services to those folks so that they can be out of crisis and they can, you know, help themselves. And that's really our role. Is like, you know, if we take a broad view of things, our job is to participate with other local government officials in making this a great place to live, the quality of life. It's all about that. It's not just putting out fires and treating those who are sick and injured. It's trying to improve the quality of life in our community.
Absolutely. It's such a critical piece of the mission of government. And you all have such a front row seat to some of the on-the-ground service delivery.
Yeah, and I would say we have a very engaged and active community too. This is one of the special communities I've had a chance to work in where people step up and willing to help out, and that's a wonderful thing to happen.
Rescue 12 and Station 8, unconscious medic level, Walmart, 975 Hilton Heights Road. Rescue 12 and Station 8, unconscious medic level, Walmart, 975 Hilton Heights Road. Timeout, 1319.
Take another pause. We're going to take another pause. We have another call into Station 12.
It is a fire station, right?
It is a fire station. And so what we've just experienced is there was a call for an engine that came in, and then just a couple minutes later we've got an ambulance. There's enough crew here to be able to respond to both of those concurrent calls.
Yes. Yes, exactly. One was a fire alarm activation, so there's a fire alarm system that's detecting a fire, and then another one is a medical call at Walmart. So yeah, see how sort of the system works? So this station's what we call tapped out now, so there's no one here. Another call, it's going to be you and I.
Well, you and I, yeah, we could do it.
We're going to take it.
And those are probably a little bit more of the traditional calls. What is ACFR doing to make sure there's resources to respond to different types of incidents? So for example, water rescues.
Yeah, we found ourselves some time ago really needed to increase our response to water rescue, and our folks did a wonderful job of stepping up. We worked very closely with the Western Albemarle Rescue Squad, who's a wonderful organization, and started our own water rescue team to really support what we're seeing in the community. That was done just before we had the terrible flash floods in Ivy, if you recall that. That's where 2 people lost their lives. That night, I think we rescued maybe a half a dozen people from the swift water. It's those kind of emergencies that we're seeing now is obviously a result of climate change. We're seeing our weather events much more fierce now than we've ever seen, so we're having to prepare for that type of response, which then, of course, brings us to emergency management. We also have plans and we have procedures in place too, so that from a broad sense, the community is much more prepared for that kind of work. I was fortunate enough, I testified before Congress about the impact of climate change on public safety. And I think everybody understands now, regardless of what's causing it, that it is something that we need to pay attention to and we needed to prepare for.
Yeah, you referenced the Ivy storm that came down pretty rapidly. Can you talk a little bit about, folks, storms like that where there's not a lot of, it's not really forecast to be a large incident, and then folks kind of find themselves out and about in the community driving, errands or, to back and forth between family and friends, find themselves out in a situation where, you've got this rapid falling weather incident. What's your advice? Talk a little bit about what those look like on the ground and what people can do to sort of be as safe as they can be when they find themselves sort of unexpectedly in the middle of an incident.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, there's this saying, turn around, don't drown, right? I don't think people understand just a small amount of water can wash your car off the roadway. And also, you don't know what's under that water. It could be, a crater. I've seen a state police car lost in a crater one time because it was washed out and they tried to cross the road. I ended up interviewing some of the people that were rescued from the Ivy incident, and they've crossed that bridge for years when there's water on the roadway and never seen anything like that. And we had cars that were washed off that bridge into what would look like this sleepy little stream was a raging river during this flood. So don't take for anything at granted. Stay on high ground, get on high ground, don't risk it. The consequences are just unbelievable. And, it was a very sad event, but at the same time, I think it got everyone's attention that we're not immune to these things that we see on the weather, in the national news. They happen right here in Albemarle County. And so we need to be very vigilant of those kind of things.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. This question actually is from CAR's Chief Virginia Leeville. She wrote, "Thank you for your leadership and service within ACFR and the greater community. Could you speak to how you envision the Charlottesville Albemarle Rescue Squad's future contributions to the fire EMS system in the county of Albemarle?"
Yeah, well, thank you, Virginia. Wonderful person, wonderful organization. They've been around a long time. and a very good organization. We're actually in discussions about how we can best position cars in the county to help us in the future. I'm very optimistic we can get to the point where we'll start to see that happening here real time. But I just want to say what a great organization it is to work with. You know, it was one of the organizations that really welcomed and embraced me when I came here. I've worked with them for years. Many of our employees and my friends who are former members of CARS, and it's sort of an ongoing joke that you run into somebody across the world, you know, they're likely to be a CARS member. So I'm really optimistic, and I appreciate their leadership and their focus on the community, and I think we can work out something that works out for both CARS and the county.
Absolutely. You know, the nature of our community, a city in the center of a county in Virginia where, you know, I think most people know independent cities and counties, so two totally different jurisdictions, really lends itself to a lot of regional services, and so it's so wonderful to see what we can do when we're all working together.
Yeah, you know, that's what makes one of the best places to work here is that there's not a lot of jurisdictional boundaries there. We work very closely with the city of Charlottesville. Many of the people that work for Charlottesville also volunteer in the county, and so we know each other, we trust each other. They operate very seamlessly on scene, and that's a benefit to everybody at the end of the day.
Absolutely. All right, well, we've been talking for quite a while. I've got one question left, and that is, what's been the most rewarding challenge you faced over your career?
That's a good question. I would have to say a response to New York City during 9/11. It was extremely challenging but rewarding at the same time. You know, of course, such a horrific event, and I was there on the 13th with a group of firefighters that I led from this department I worked at previously. And I really didn't understand, quite frankly, the magnitude. I still don't know to the day. But it was just overwhelming. You know, I was there when President Bush was on top of the fire truck and gave his speech, and got to see he and Hillary Clinton and Governor Pataki at the time. And it's just the emotions and really at the time, the pride to be an American just really filled all of us. We still talk on the anniversary every year, the people who are still around. Many of the people have gone different places, but we still get together and we talk about that. And I think just the honor to be a part of that and to serve and lead that team there, to me, I'll never forget that experience.
I'm going to make you brag on yourself a little bit, because I was so overwhelmed when I learned that, you know, you responded to that on the 13th. You had you weren't called specifically to go and respond to that. That was a choice that you made, I believe you slept in your car.
Well, we slept on the streets, but it was really our mayor at the time. Their mayor, this place I worked at in Franklin, the city of Franklin, was a very well-connected mayor, UVA graduate. He knew everybody. He was personal friends with the mayor at the time, and he came down, and he had all worked out with the city of Chesapeake. He says, "You're going to go. I'm not giving you a choice." And I pushed back a little bit, but he's the kind of guy you don't want to push back too much. And he says, "I want you to go." And not only did we go, we came back with everyone, but we hosted New York City firefighters there, and we showed them a good time and gave them a chance to just relax and get away from the city for a while. He still maintains many of those relationships. But yeah, very, very good leader. And it was really an honor, you know, to do that. The devastation was just horrible, but you know, I was proud of how this country came together during that difficult time to really heal. I mean, that's our Pearl Harbor, quite frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chief, hate to end on a sort of a sad note, but I've really enjoyed our time together today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for hosting.
Yes.
I'm in your house.
This is nice. You're welcome anytime. We welcome anybody to drop by, too. You know, this is the community's firehouse. It's not just ours. And that's why we leave the doors open, and so you can see the apparatus and the people. We're a very welcoming group.
Absolutely. Thank you so much today.
Thank
you
you
everyone for tuning in with us, and we'll talk again soon.
Where are you?